This conference will now be recorded.
So thank you once again for joining the webinar. The topic of today is how do you respond to life-changing events and how do you keep calm and carry on? This webinar was organized by EWPN, the European Women in Payments Network, and we're very, very honored to have Bill Mann join us today. He is an executive coach and set up the Keep Calm guy, and he has learned the hard way of coping with change and how to embrace it. Bill will share his story, but just very briefly to introduce, he went through a challenging situation of almost coming too close to losing his life. He was caught up in the London 7/7 attacks in bombs in 2005, and this year it's the 15th anniversary of that terrible day. And Bill will be sharing his story with us and how he overcame that mental trauma that stayed with him for years. And unfortunately, just as he was coming to terms with that, his wife was diagnosed with cancer and subsequently passed away. Bill's life was rocked by this, and he was also left with 4 children to support through their grief. And not only he got through these dreadful events, but you will see that with his positivity, he managed to completely rebuild his life and enjoys a whole different level of success and happiness. And without further ado, I will pass the screen to Bill. Thank you very much. In the end of the session, we will have a Q&A session. There is a little chat box that you can click on and put your questions. Either you can ask everybody, or you can ask Bill directly. Thank you. Bill, over to you.
Lovely. Thanks, Alana, and thanks for the introduction. And again, apologies everyone for being slightly late. Alana and I were having a lovely chat on a completely different webinar group. So yeah, sorry for the slight delay. And thank you all very much for joining me today and taking sort of time out. I know everyone's busy, but I do appreciate you taking time out to listen to my story and what I went through. My connection with payments and EWPN is because in my earlier corporate career, that was all spent in the payments world. I worked for a variety of organizations, software companies. I was with ACI for a long time, hardware companies. I was with Tandem Computers, if anybody remembers them, First Data, TNS. I've worked in banks. The last role I had, though, was with Visa in Paddington in London. And I joined them on the 6th of June 2005. And it was exactly a month later, on the 6th of July, that it was announced that London had won the 2012 Olympics. And I mention this because Visa was and still is a sort of primary sponsor of the Olympics. So you can imagine the environment, the context in which I was sort of going to work the following day. You know, London was buzzing with news that we'd won the Olympics, and Visa in particular, and obviously in the office, there was a huge amount of excitement about the about 2012 and the plans that we'd have to put in place for the Olympics. So that was the background, that was the context, and that was what I was thinking about the next day when I was sitting on the train on my way into work. But little did I know, it was all about to change. I was looking around the other passengers because there was a chap sitting opposite me, James, I believe his name was, who had caught my eye. And so I was just looking at the other passengers. I'd finished reading the newspaper, I wasn't listening to an iPod, and the train pulled out into the tunnel. I remember the eastbound train coming in the other direction and the tracks alongside us.
I was still reading the Metro newspaper. And I remember there was suddenly a very loud bang
Reports are just coming in of an explosion at Liverpool Street Station here in London.
On that old gate, I can confirm bomb damage to train, one carriage completely wiped out, at least 90 people very seriously injured and trapped, 2 confirmed fatalities.
Explosion. Big white appeared, and then it was just smoke everywhere. In the tunnel, we was trying to close the doors because it was just smoke, you couldn't breathe.
Everyone's just asking what's happened. All we're being told is it's a major injury and the whole of the London Underground is now shut.
I didn't check myself over because I knew I hadn't been injured, seriously injured. I mean, I hadn't been hit by anything or struck by anything. But James, the chap that was sitting opposite me, he stood up and was getting very agitated. I think he was very concerned.
Well, I thought I was going to die. And I was upset because I wanted to go to college still. Because I was expected to go to college still. And I was just worried and nervous and anxious and not very happy.
He mentioned to us that he was autistic and needed to get to his father, I think it was, and just wanted his father. So we just had to keep reassuring him that we'd be okay and we would get out.
Tony Darren. Hello, Darren. What's happening, mate? Do you know? 204 apparently has reported hearing an explosion on his train. Explosion on train, yeah? Or a bang on his train. Hello, Pick, sorry.
Hello, mate. Yeah, Pick Control there. Yeah. Just to let you know, we've got a TT op.
Yeah.
0850. By the way, Russell Square. TT information, hello.
On Supervisor Tollgate, we've just had a big explosion. There appears to be something ahead of the train in the track.
Has anyone been injured at all?
We're not aware that anybody's been injured as yet, no.
Okay.
But there is smoke.
Yeah.
We've lost all power as well.
No power?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, you're not the only one that's actually had this done, so I'm going to confirm with my manager, and we'll be in touch with you in a second.
The people in the train beside us started smashing the windows to try and help. People were passing over bottles of water, but obviously there wasn't a huge amount they could do. There was 1 or 2 people climbed over. I think they had sort of first aid skills.
We're now also hearing that there have been further incidents at Russell Square. There are 2 trains stuck in tunnels at Edgware Road, and it's not known if they've collided or whether passengers remain on board.
Everyone thought they were going to die.
We're now hearing reports that a bus has been ripped apart in an explosion in central London.
One man has actually shown myself some footage that he recorded on his mobile phone of a bus exploding a few streets away, just near to Euston Station.
So quite a chilling day, and every time I sort of give this presentation and watch that video, obviously it brings it all back to me. I could probably talk for hours now about what happened that day, and also in the days and the weeks and the months that followed. But there were 3 specific moments during that time where I suddenly saw things with such clarity. It was almost like an epiphany, the way I viewed things, and it was so profound that it did change my perspective on life. And certainly when I did eventually get off of the carriage that morning, I was a different person. I was a different person to the man that had entered it sort of 20, 30 minutes earlier. And the first of those moments was right in the middle of the explosion. As it unfolded, the train was still moving. There were fragments of broken glass flying through the air. A lot of them cut into my suit and cut into my skin. There was burning embers from what was ever in the bomb flying past my eyes. I managed to sort of grab the handrail and steady myself. And my initial thoughts were, is this it? Is this where it all ends? You know, obviously I'd never thought of life ending so suddenly, but I was faced with the real prospect of that was going to happen. And obviously I did think about my life. It's a bit of a cliche, but it did sort of flash before my eyes. And I thought about my wife, and I thought about my children, and I thought about my family. And right in the middle, as the bomb was still going off around me, I suddenly realized that not only did I want to live, but all the things I wanted to live for, and the only things I wanted to live for, were the things that money can't buy. You know, I wanted to be here for my children. I wanted to be able to sort of have dinner with them in the evening, or, you know, put them to bed at night, or read stories, or all those sorts of things. You know, those little moments that, I say, literally money can't buy. And again, even in the moment as the bomb was unfolding around me, I thought, well, actually, the stuff that normally consumes us on a day-to-day basis, like careers and job progression, you know, money, income, lifestyle, houses, cars, you know, whatever it may be, suddenly it was just totally irrelevant. And I realized that, you know, no matter if I never worked again, no matter how poor we might be or whatever happened, as long as I was here and as long as, you know, I had my health and I was alive, I could enjoy all the things that really mattered. So it gave me such a profound sense of perspective. And even now when things happen, you know, we're all sort of struggling with lockdown and the effects of the pandemic and how that's going to sort of change our lives. But for me, this is my anchor. You know, I come back to this and think, well, you know, all that really matters at the end of the day is that we're here to enjoy each day, you know, regardless of what's going on. And the old saying that, you know, your health is your wealth is very true. You know, you can't buy it, you know, you can't buy time. So the first thing that really struck me and so really changed me, and I do, you know, come back to it again and again, is that just that sense of perspective of what's really important in life, and and everything else, you know, we can deal with. You know, we'll get through it one way or another. And the same is very true of this pandemic and all of the consequences and the impacts that it will have. We'll all get through it. And as I say, as long as we get through it with our own health intact and the health of our loved ones, then at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. The second moment for me came several days later when I was at home. Obviously, I took some time off and I was thinking about what had happened, but the way it was going through my head, it was like on a sort of constant replay loop. I would think about the day and everything that happened in absolute minutiae, you know, all the details, and then I'd go around it again and again and again, and you know, it probably was driving me mad. And apart from just thinking it through, I had so many questions, you know, questions that there was never going to be an answer to. You know, things like, why me? You know, things like this, you know, don't happen to people like me, but you know, it just did. I thought, well, why not me? You know, it has to happen to somebody. And I thought, well, why did I get on that train? If I'd have got on an earlier train or a later train, I'd have missed it completely. But I got on the train that I did. So why did I get in that carriage? All the other carriages were fine. Why did I get on the set of doors that I did? If I'd have got on the next set of doors along, I wouldn't be here talking to you this afternoon. So, you know, all of these questions about, you know, why me? You know, why did I do that? What if things had been different? But of course, never any answers. And the combination of just going over it again and again and again, and all of these questions, all of these thoughts, you know, running through my head, I got to the point where I felt like I was on the verge of a breakdown. I felt like I was staring into the abyss, and it would be so easy just to let go and let myself fall into it. And I thought, well, no one would blame me, you know, with the experience that I've been through. you know, coming so close to losing my life. You know, no one would blame me if I had some sort of breakdown. Everybody would sort of totally understand. And it was very tempting. But I realized that if I was going to do that, I had to let go. I had to let it happen. I had to give up. I had to, you know, bury my head in the sand under the duvet, you know, not come out, you know, just let it all collapse around me. But I thought, well, if I've got to let go, then that means it's a conscious decision to let go. And if it's a conscious decision, that means it's a decision that I make. And then I thought, well, if that's the case, I'm not going to do it. You know, I'm not going to have that breakdown. I'm not going to fall into the abyss. And what it really taught me, and again, you've probably heard this before, and you'll probably hear it again, but in the moment, I suddenly realized that actually it doesn't really matter what has happened, what's gone on in the past. What matters is how I respond, how I choose to respond. And I wasn't in control of the events at 7/7. I wasn't in control of the bomb, but I'm certainly in control of what I did now and how I responded, how I thought about it, how I reacted. And for me, that gave me the real confidence to say, well, okay, if I am in control now, and if it is a decision, then I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to, you know, let myself have this breakdown. I am going to persevere. I am going to move forward. I am going to carry on. Even if I don't know exactly how that's going to work or how I'm going to get through it, I'm going to go forward. And again, that whole point of, you know, we're not in control of some of the external events that happen, but we are in control of what we do and how we respond, was the second sort of major point of clarity that I sort of really took away from that event. And again, is also equally true today when we think about the lockdown and the pandemic and the impacts that's having on everyone's lives. Then yes, none of us can control what's happened, but certainly, you know, we are in control of what we do now, how we respond to it, how we react to it, how we think about it, the actions, you know, we take now, the decisions we take now. We are still sort of totally in control. And again, I think it's hopefully sort of something, you know, you might be able to sort of take away and think about now in terms of how we respond in light of the pandemic. And then the third point that really struck me, and you might think I'm a bit of a slow learner, but this was sort of a couple of weeks later, and I was on my way into work. I'd gone back to work, so I was doing the same journey again, which was tough, but I made myself do it. I went back to work, doing the same journey. Got to Paddington Station, off the train, and there's a short walk from the station down one of the platforms to the visa offices. And I remember walking down this platform, and it suddenly struck me that I might not have been here to see the day. You know, I might not have lived, you know, to enjoy the day. And then, I mean, that really, as I said, you might think that would have sort of struck me earlier, but I remember walking down that platform that morning thinking, wow, you know, I might not have had today, so in that case I have to make today count. You know, I can't just let 24 hours slip through my fingers, as you know, it's so easy to do for many of us. You know, we get into a routine, we get into a way of doing things, and before we know it, you know, the day's over, and you know, we go to sleep and the day's gone. And it's suddenly I realized that, you know, time, you can't buy it. It is so critical. As I knew, life is actually can be quite tenuous, so you have to make the most of it. And I thought, well, how do I make the day count? And for me, it wasn't about creating a bucket list and going off doing lots of weird and wacky things. It was actually about, for me, the fact that I did survive, the fact that I did live, was making sure that my existence, my presence, had a positive impact on the people around me. And that wasn't not just, you know, my immediate family, because obviously, hopefully, you know, it was positive for them, but also everyone I met during the day. So when I walked into the office that day, I suddenly saw people in a different light. I suddenly saw that all of the interactions I was having, whether it was people that I'd known for many years, whether it was someone I was just meeting for the first time that day, actually I wanted to have a positive influence. You know, I wanted it to be a positive experience. And I suddenly saw all the people around me as, you know, people, you know, as, you know, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, whatever it may be. And every interaction I had, every conversation I had, I always, you know, made that sort of personal connection with people and asked them how they were doing, how their day was, you know, if there was anything I could help them with, whatever it may be, even no matter how small or how trivial. For me, it was important that, you know, for me being there was a positive influence in their lives. You know, I say no matter how slight or how significant, you know, for me, that is what made living and getting through the experience matter, you know, is leaving a positive legacy, having a positive effect on the people around me, you know, being there for my family and my children, but also my colleagues, you know, suppliers, customers, you know, anyone else that I met, you know, having a positive influence in everyone I came across on a day-to-day basis. And again, that was for me quite a sort of profound moment, because it has changed me. If you think about the three moments I've just described, actually each of them has changed my outlook, has changed my way of thinking, and has changed the way I sort of behave towards other people, how I interact with other people, the person I am. So hopefully you can see that, you know, those experiences and particularly these three moments have really had a sort of significant impact on me, but they're also three very significant lessons that I keep alive for me, because I come back to them all the time. So like even today, what is it? It's the 16th of July, 2020. What difference have you made today? What difference have I made today? You know, how have I made today count? You know, and it does all of these things, you know, have changed my perspective for the better. No, I wouldn't like to go through it again, but these things have had a sort of positive influence on me and continue to have a positive influence on me in terms of my outlook on life, my mindset, and how I approach things. And I would ideally like to say that's where the story ends. But as you know, I was just coming to terms with everything that happened. And it did take me about sort of 2.5, 3 years. And I felt like I was just getting my head above water. Life was getting back to some sort of sense of normality when my wife was diagnosed with cancer. And unfortunately, she did pass away. We had 4 young children at the time. And for me, it felt like I'd just been knocked back down to the ground again. You know, my whole future, or the future I thought I was going to have, went up in smoke, and I was left alone with the children, obviously sort of dealing with my own grief, but having to sort of support them sort of through the process. And I spent a lot of time just wondering how I was going to cope. Now, my experience of the 7/7 bombs taught me one thing, which is that I could find the strength that I needed to get through. And I guess in that sense, it did help me with the belief that I would get through this. I didn't know how, but it did give me an understanding that, you know, I could find the strength that I needed, and I would get through it. But I spent an awful lot of time just wondering what had happened to me, because in the late 90s, life was really good. Couldn't have been better. Everything was going well. Career was going well. Family was growing. You know, life was just great. And yet here I was, sort of 10 years later or so, and it had all gone. and I felt like absolute rock bottom, wondering if I would ever find my way through it, and quite honestly, if I'd ever be happy again, because I'd known, a very high level of happiness, what Maslow would describe as sort of self-actualization. I'd been in that zone, but it all gone. It evaporated, and I was down at rock bottom, wondering how on earth I would get through it. And I eventually sort of came to understand what this guy here had taught sort of over 2,000 years ago. So this is Marcus Aurelius. He's a Roman sort of philosopher, lived, as I say, just over 2,000 years ago. Kept a little journal, a little diary that was later published as his Meditations. Fantastic little book full of great nuggets of wisdom. But one of the things that he said is that within us, we have everything we need to create a happy life. It's all within our way of thinking. And I reached that realization myself, and I realized that, there's no reason why I couldn't be happy again. There's no reason why I shouldn't be happy again. And then my thoughts started to turn, well, how do I do that? What do I need in my life to create that? I spent a lot of time thinking about human needs, a lot of time thinking about balance, all the things that need to be in place. There's no silver bullets, there's no one thing that's going to create that. It's a case of making sure all our human needs are met, and in balance. And I set about creating a sort of a vision for myself, and working out how I was going to rebuild my life. And I'm pleased to say, it's taken me sort of several years, but by following that, by following my sort of my vision, my goals of what I wanted a sort of happy life to be, I have been able to create it. So, ultimately, following my wife's death, I did have to make some changes, but I'm now effectively running my own business. I've got 2 businesses that are running successfully. I've written a couple of books on the subjects. I speak on the subjects that I coach. I've got various interests. I'm pleased to say a few years ago I did remarry. Now I've got a fantastic wife and a stepson, so I've got a bigger family, and life couldn't be better. But it was all stemmed from sort of digging deep within me, and as Marcus Aurelius was saying, creating the right mindset so that I could allow myself to rebuild my life and rebuild it in the fashion that I wanted it. And part of that was also understanding my sort of true identity and becoming totally comfortable in my own skin, shrugging off all of the labels that people have sort of given to me over the years, shrugging off all of the self-doubts and self-limiting beliefs that we all tend to have, and actually daring to sort of dream big and dreaming of a sort of a future or a vision of a future that was in many ways better than the one I'd left behind. And so what I want to leave you with in terms of my experiences of both of those events, firstly with surviving through the bomb, and then going through the bereavement and losing my wife, are these 6 points. These are the points that I've been talking about. So initially for me, when it was sort of facing the aftermath of 7/7, the things I really took away from that, and again I come back to on a sort of day-to-day basis, is keeping that sense of perspective of what's really important, knowing that I am in control now of how I respond, and also valuing every day, living in the moment, living in the day, and realizing that for me, so easily it could have gone, I might not have been here. But using that experience, looking at how I move forward, and particularly, you know, sort of now in the light of the pandemic and the effects of the lockdown, realizing that in every change, no matter how big or small, you know, it certainly doesn't have to be anything near as big or traumatic as I've been through, but even in small changes, even in the way things evolve now for us all, as we come out of the lockdown and as we work through the pandemic, there are always opportunities in change. And as I said, for me, and I believe many others, the biggest challenge is not external, it's internal, it's in our own mindset and our ability to manage our mindset. And that self-mastery, being able to work through it, is actually what opens the doors to success. And being able to do that and being able to have the sort of the courage and the boldness to say, well, you know, I am going to do it. I'm going to remove all those self-limiting beliefs, all those self-doubts, and I'm going to dare to dream big, because life is short. It can be taken away at any moment. You've got to go for it. You know, you only get one life, and you've really got to make it count. So that's my story. Well, that's that's the short version of my story. As I said, I can talk for hours about what I've been through and how I dealt with it, and some of the specifics of the the events. Someone said to me sort of 4 or 5 years ago when I was telling them my story, "Oh, you should write a book." And I didn't think anything of it at the time, but it became one of those itches I just had to scratch. So a couple of years ago, I wrote How to Keep Calm and Carry On, which is based on my experiences. But I describe it as a sort of semi-autobiographical account of sort of coping with change, because I describe in it a lot of the psychology that I went through, a lot of the tools, techniques, strategies that I adopted to help me cope. And I did it partly because I realized I'd learned so much from these experiences, I wanted to pass them on. And my thinking was that if I can do that, even if I could just help one person, it would be worth doing. And I'm very pleased to say, you know, within a few weeks of the book being published, a guy came up to me and said, I lost my wife a few months ago, and your book has really, really helped. And that was all I needed to hear. You know, that justified everything I'd done. So I get a huge buzz and a huge sense of satisfaction from being able to help people, which is why, you know, as I've moved into doing what I do. I wrote Change Leadership because of my sort of corporate background and understanding. I suddenly understood and realized that the reason why, you know, sort of change is so difficult within businesses, within organizations, and why change and transformation projects seem to run into so much resistance. And it is because, you know, even with the best change management sort of techniques in the world, none of them really make the final step of connecting the organizational change with a personal change at a sort of deep and personal level. And that's what sort of change leadership is all about, is how to do that. And again, for me, you know, the driving factor is seeing so many people in a professional context struggling with any sort of organizational change, pushing back, resisting, frustration arising. And I could see it. I could see exactly why it was happening. So, you know, I wanted to do something about it, which is where sort of change leadership sort of comes from. So that's me. What I do now, as I say, I haven't written the books. I thought, well, how can I help people? And I largely do that now either through sort of one-to-one coaching, either in a sort of professional sense or in a sort of personal sense, you know, in terms of life change, and also do some sort of leadership training and leadership development, trying to really help leaders understand what it means at a personal level when, you know, you're trying to implement sort of change in your organization, and some of the hurdles that you typically encounter, some of the pitfalls that, you know, most organizations fall into, and actually how you can avoid all that, how you can avoid a lot of the pain. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you're able to take away at least one thing from you know, the 6 points that I covered, you know, whether it's, you know, valuing every day, whether it's the sense of perspective, whatever it may be. Thank you again. Thank you very much for listening. More than happy to take any questions that have come through. Alana.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you. I just want to remind the participants that you can write the questions in the little chat box at the top right corner, and either you can send it to Bill directly or to me, and I can read it out for you if you want to remain anonymous, or you can just post it in the little bubble box. Before we move on also to the questions part, just to give Bill some time maybe to grab a sip of water. Next week, next Thursday, we will have our second session with Bill. And I think what you have mentioned in your second point, being a positive influence, I suppose it came from there that the second topic of the webinar will be with your other leadership development organization that you are part of. And the topic will be, how does leadership have to change as we lead people out of the storm of the pandemic? That will be next. Yeah.
Yeah, it's obviously I've met some very interesting people over the last few years, and a couple of sort of colleagues that actually sort of have the same sort of values and beliefs that I have, particularly in terms of how leadership needs to sort of develop and evolve. And all of this was before the pandemic came along. So now looking at what's happened and the impact on individuals and everyone's lives, and understanding the profound effects that the pandemic is having, actually it becomes a catalyst for sort of long and lasting change. And we're starting to see that, whether it's the way sort of people work, the working from home, the flexibility, but particularly in the context of, well, how do you now lead people through such a tumultuous sort of period of change? There's a huge amount of uncertainty out there. Everyone's been impacted at a personal level as well.
Right.
The traditional ways of leading a team of people or leading an organization alone won't be sufficient. There has to be a shift that accommodates and allows for all of these impacts, and introduces a much stronger theme of mindful leadership, putting people's well-being at the front and center of leadership. And so it's obviously something I feel passionate about because of my personal experiences. And my two colleagues will be joining me sort of next week. They have the same values, the same beliefs. And so, yeah, we want to sort of cover that topic and offer up our sort of suggestions as to, how people can and sort of should respond.
Thank you. We're looking forward to that. So the announcement will be made today, and the registration will be open also later on today to register for next week, Thursday, same time, second session with Bill. Any questions, anybody? You can, once again, just a reminder, you can post it in the chat box. While we wait for the questions to come in, maybe a question that I've been pondering on is, lately throughout this, and I'm sure many people feel the same way, but throughout the pandemic, we kind of go through the emotional roller coaster of one day you feeling that things are, better and things are improving and we're coming out of lockdown, and then you read the news the next day and you hear that their second wave might be coming, or some countries are coming out of lockdown and going back into lockdown. How do you deal with that? How can we remain more stable, and how can we cope with that?
So there's a number of things you can do. I mean, the first is, you said it yourself, it's an emotional roller coaster of a journey. And if you understand, the process of change, most people will be familiar with the change curve and, the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, sort of dealing with change. And it is a roller coaster. So partly is recognizing that that's a normal part of the journey. You will have days where you feel really down and negative and sort of fed up, and you'll have days where you're more sort of positive and optimistic. So you can start by allowing yourself the luxury of accepting, well, you know, this is part of the journey. There's nothing wrong with having those down days. There are things you can do to sort of minimize them. So for me, you know, particularly after I lost my wife with 4 children, I realized that as a single parent, I couldn't afford to be ill physically or, you know, mentally. You know, I had to look after my mental welfare. So particularly if people are sort of struggling in any sense of the word emotionally with what's going on, one of the things you have to start with is by looking after yourself. So that is, as I say, both physically, you know, making sure you get enough sleep, making sure you eat properly, exercise, etc., you know, whatever it is, but, you know, don't let that slide. For me in particular, it was all about making sure I got enough sleep in the day, because I don't cope very well on short sleep, and that just made everything much worse. So you have to start by sort of looking after yourself, and then on the sort of the mental side of things, there are tools and techniques you can use to recognize, actually, I'm in this sort of emotional state today. You know, can I change it? You know, there are things you can do to change your emotional state. It doesn't always work, but some of the times you can. Different things work for different people. For me, sometimes just taking the dog out and going for a walk for half an hour would be enough to change my mindset, and I'd be in a different place when I came back. There's different ways you can change the way you're thinking. If you're familiar with the different thinking styles, there's a lot of negative thinking styles that people often fall into, and again, you can change that. You know, there's tools, techniques you can use to say, well, okay, I recognize that the way I'm thinking today is actually negative, it's unhelpful, it's holding me back. You can, if you're conscious of what's going on, then you can change that around, and you can say, well, okay, I need to break this pattern of thought, and I need to adopt a different pattern of thought that's more positive and constructive. It doesn't always work. It does take a bit of practice, but it can be done. So you can, once you recognize what's going on, you know, you can manipulate your mindset. But even if you can't, just accepting that you're having a down day, and actually the solution is time. You know, you need to give yourself time. Write the day off, go to bed early, you know, whatever it may be. Give yourself that break.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure many people are going through this state at the moment, and you know, we're navigating through new territory, and for everyone, it's new emotions that we find, new situations that we find ourselves in, new emotions that we need to find a way of dealing with, and any advice helps, I suppose.
And it is a tough journey. You know, you've only got to think about how. I came across a good example. I was talking to someone the other day about how people react to change, and one of the things that always used to make me laugh is, in an office environment, the minute you announce that you're going to move people around and reorganize things internally, people panic. You know, where am I going to be sitting? Where's my desk going to be? You know, who am I going to be sitting beside? Why are you moving me? You know, and if such a simple thing can cause such a response, then it's no wonder why, you know, bigger questions like genuine organizational restructures or the pandemic or whatever it may be have a much more profound effect. So just think about how people respond to even the smallest of changes. And once you magnify that up, you can understand, you know, why the extremes of emotion are what they are sometimes, but also, you know, it does make you start to question, well, how do I manage that? How do I change that? You know, if my response is out of proportion or it's illogical, then what do I need to do to change it? It fascinates me, which is why, you know, I really spend a lot of time sort of thinking about it. And I guess for me, it's probably what has helped me is, you know, my own curiosity about the way our minds work and why we behave and respond to things the way that we do has helped me dig down deep and work out what I need to change.
Yeah. We just have a question coming in. So how to not put your personal stress on your colleague? Obviously, you do not want to contaminate the atmosphere with your bad mood. How do you cope with this?
Good question. I think it's partly about developing a strong sense of self-awareness. I mean, the fact that you're asking the question is a good sign, because it's obviously you recognize that it's happening, but with an acute self-awareness, so you realize you're in a bad mood, or you're having a down day, or you're suffering undue stress or pressure, then actually that's where your emotional intelligence starts to grow and build. Because once you then start exerting your own sort of self-control on that and say, well, okay, I recognize what's happening to me, and I recognize that I can't sort of treat my peers, the peers around me, in the same way, or I can't express my frustration or emotions on them. That internal dialogue is where your emotional intelligence builds. And once you've got that self-control to say, well, okay, the fact that I'm struggling and the fact that I'm under a lot of pressure doesn't mean I need to let it influence my sort of dialogue with my colleague. And again, it's by understanding yourself and recognizing how you need to control it. If you are able to control it, then you can just put it to one side, and have a business conversation with your colleague. Or you might say, well, actually, I can't put the lid on this. I'm going to have to defer that conversation for 30 minutes while I go and take a break, clear my head, and come back to it. But it starts with self-awareness, I guess, is the answer. Because once you're aware of the situation and how you are thinking and feeling and likely to respond, and how appropriate that is, then you can start to control it. Again, I find it fascinating because the aspects of the mindset, self-awareness and the self-control, self-mastery around that, are things that you can develop and build upon and practice on. Whether it's small events, small things, like the example I gave. You can build the skill, you can build the muscle, you can build the knowledge up, so that you've got the sort of self-control to do that.
Right. Thank you very much. One more question. How do you explain all these tragic incidents that have happened to you, to your family, to your kids, and how do you teach them to still have a positive outlook on life?
Yes, my toughest challenge was not the bomb. It was supporting my children, because any parents out there will know, you'd do anything for your children. And the toughest thing I've ever done was having to break the news to the children that their mum had cancer and wasn't going to live. And I made a conscious decision at that point. For me, my approach was, well, this obviously rocks their world. Apart from being there for them and supporting them and loving them, the other thing I can do is keep the rest of their world secure and constant, and not change it. So I made a conscious effort to try and keep everything else the same for them. So that, whether it's their daily routines, making sure, they were fed and looked after, the way they always had been, they went to the same clubs, obviously, showered them with sort of love and support to know that I was there for them. And that's all I could do. And I guess the other aspect to the question, or the other answer, is partly also by leading by example. I knew, for example, if I couldn't cope, if I clearly sort of struggled, then that would have a really negative influence on them. So for me to dig deep and be strong for them was another way of, well, literally that, being strong for them and you know, supporting them and allowing them to get through it with, you know, with a degree of confidence and belief that they would get through it. Obviously really tough, but I'm pleased to say that none of the kids went off the rails, even though it's probably the hardest thing that they'll ever live through in their lives. None of them went off the rails, none of them particularly struggled. They all had moments where, you know, it was really tough, they were really upset, you know, they couldn't understand what was going on. So they all had their moments, but they were just moments, and I was able to sort of support them and keep them, you know, keep them on track. My greatest achievement, you know, at the end of the day, you know, anything else I do, you know, it's the one thing, as any parent will understand, you know, being there for them, supporting them through this period, it will always be my greatest achievement.
Thank you for sharing that experience. We have one more question, and I think it has a very good lead into our next session next week. How do you recommend to implement structural changes as an outsider in an organization that already has an embedded culture that everyone enjoys?
I'm not sure about the question. The embedded culture that everyone enjoys, if that implies a very positive culture that everyone literally does enjoy, i.e. you don't want to sort of change the culture, then it really comes down to consistently living and behaving according to the values that have created that culture. So for example, you know, in an organization that might be facing real sort of business challenges now, you know, let's take an obvious example, you know, job cuts, redundancies, which is, you know, a very sort of tough thing to do. In an organization with a very positive and strong culture, you can face up to those tough decisions and those tough actions, but by still upholding, you know, the values, you know, treating people with respect and trust and dignity, doing the right thing by the whole organization and everyone in the organization, being open and transparent, being clear, so that everyone understands that, you know, changes are inevitable, you know, they are unavoidable, but, you know, the organization, the leadership are doing the right things by the right people and being fair and being open and being honest. Then you can uphold the culture, you can uphold the values of the organization that underpin that culture, and you can still get through sort of obviously what's could be, you know, really tough times. So you can do it. Where it goes wrong for a lot of organizations is where the leadership suddenly becomes very insular because they're in sort of survival mode, and start getting dictatorial and just, you know, imposing and announcing what's going to happen, and then, you know, that trust and respect starts to fall away. It's all about how it's done, and, you know, the values that underpin it. And if you've got a strong leadership team and you've got a strong culture, you can certainly carry that through. Not only carry it through sort of difficult times, it's what often will carry the business through those difficult times. Is, you know, it's having that good culture. Right.
And just to close it off, because that's kind of led me thinking, and if this culture is missing and you would like to bring that culture in, what can you do to encourage it, to embrace it, to?
Well, unfortunately, it has to start from the top.
Right.
So, you know, if it's not there, it's almost impossible to create it from the bottom up. So the leadership team, quite often the CEO, you know, it will depend on that team, those characters, the values that they live by. And if they're not there, unfortunately, it's really tough to overturn it. Now, the glimmer of hope is that with events like the pandemic, you know, as I say, that is often a real catalyst for change. And you know, a leadership team, top team that, you know, recognise what's happened and recognise that they need to do things differently, is often a sort of good opportunity to start having those discussions and say to them, well, okay, this is what's happened to our industry, this is what's happened to our business, you know, how are we going to get through this? And as you say, it's almost a great point to say, this is really what I want to sort of discuss with my colleagues next week, because, you know, we've been thinking about how do businesses respond, how do organizations respond in the context I've just been describing, with a great deal of heart, with a great deal of empathy and a great deal of compassion. I say that's a great question, and we'll answer it next week, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bill. I think just being cautious of the time as well, not to keep people on for longer. Thank you again. Thank you for all the participants for joining. Just a reminder, the registration will be open tonight for the next session with Bill next Thursday, 23rd of July, at the same time, 4 o'clock Central European time. And the topic is, how does leadership have to change as we lead people out of the storm of the pandemic? Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Alana. And if ever anyone has got any questions or wants to come back to me afterwards, either on the email or phone number, then do feel free to reach out. As I say, I get a huge amount of satisfaction from helping people. So if I can help you, just let me know.
Great. Thank you very much, and we speak next week.
Thanks, Alana.